Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Monday, the 2nd of June. You're tuned in to our mid-morning newscast here on Arirang TV. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. South Korea, the United States and China are discussing conditions to resume the six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea. Seoul's chief nuclear envoy says talks cannot open unconditionally. South Korea and the United States have agreed to set the timing of and conditions for the transfer of wartime control of South Korean troops from Washington to Seoul by October. Plus, turnout rates from the two-day early voting period for the June 4th local elections show only a slight disparity between the younger and older generations. But our top story this morning, the top nuclear envoys of South Korea, the United States and China may be edging closer to working out a way to restart the long-stalled six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea. Our Choi You-sun reports.
This latest visit to Washington by South Korea's chief nuclear envoy has many wondering if it could offer a turning point for the long-stalled six-party talks to denuclearize North Korea.
Starting with last week's South Korea-China foreign ministers meeting, we've been discussing the conditions to resuming denuclearization talks with countries like the U.S. and China. To that extent, we plan to hold an in-depth discussion with the U.S.
The envoy's remarks hint there may be possible progress on the North Korean nuclear issue ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's expected visit to Seoul this month. When Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently came to Seoul, China asked South Korea to actively push for the talk resumption, to which the South expressed its will to set the pre-talk conditions. In fact, Seoul has taken a more flexible stance on the matter as of late, recognizing there's need for a venue to discuss disarming the North, albeit under a set of conditions. The South Korean negotiator in Washington said this is because the regime conducted 3 nuclear tests, 2 of which took place since the talks were suspended 5 years ago. Therefore, Seoul will seek to mediate between Washington and Beijing as the U.S. insists the North take concrete steps to prove it's ready to give up its nuclear arms before dialogue can reopen. Japan recently agreed to lift sanctions if the North reopens a probe into the abduction of Japanese nationals is another issue of concern. When their nuclear envoys meet Monday, Seoul and Washington are expected to agree that Tokyo should remain committed to the 3 parties' cooperation on resolving the North Korean nuclear issue. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
The South Korean government is calling on Pyongyang to release a South Korean missionary who has been sentenced to life with hard labor. In a statement Sunday, Seoul's Unification Ministry said it was extremely regrettable the North has ignored the South's calls to free Kim Jong-uk and instead put him on trial. North Korea's state media said Saturday that the missionary had admitted to committing religious acts against the state. Kim was arrested by the North last October on charges of espionage and trying to set up underground churches. The Unification Ministry said North Korea's latest measures were a serious violation of human rights and asked that Kim be allowed to contact his family and a lawyer until he is freed. President Park Geun-hye has tapped current Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin as her new top security advisor. Referring to his 4-year tenure as defense chief, the presidential office said Kim's field experience and years of policy-making will help him faithfully carry out his duties as the head of the National Security Office. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Han Min-gu, who is highly respected within the military, has been nominated to replace Kim. The nomination comes 10 days after both the president's top security advisor and the intelligence chief stepped down amid government reforms. President Park is thought to have named a candidate for one of the 2 posts amid rising concerns about a prolonged vacancy in the security control tower amid continuous threats from North Korea. Now, the defense chiefs of South Korea and the US have agreed to set the timing and conditions for the transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul by October. Experts expect the transfer date to be sometime in early 2020. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul topped the agenda of talks between Korean Defense Minister Kim Kwon-jin and U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel at the ongoing Asia Security Summit, Shangri-La Dialogue, in Singapore over the weekend.
Korea and the U.S. have agreed to set the date and conditions for the transfer by the annual Security Consultative Meeting in October. We have been conducting numerous working-level talks and are scheduled to hold several more rounds of talks.
Experts say the transfer is likely to be pushed back 5 to 7 years and will take place in early 2020. That's the time when Korea Air and Missile Defense System, which could counter missiles and nuclear weapons from Pyongyang, is scheduled to be implemented. The question of whether the U.S.-led missile defense system will be implemented in Korea was not discussed during the meeting. Korea's defense ministry says there were no opposing views on Korea setting up its own missile defense system.
As we've said in the past, we will establish our own missile defense system while enhancing interoperability with the U.S. Japan will not be included in our plan.
In related news, Kim said that Japan could exercise its collective self-defense outside the theater of South Korea's operations, a thinly veiled warning that Japanese self-defense forces will not be admitted to South Korea unless requested by Seoul. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery and their families from 8 countries will call on the Japanese government today to settle the issue once and for all. The Korean Council representing the victims says the former sex slaves, their families and civic activists plan to demonstrate in front of the Japanese Diet's lower house on this Monday. They will also condemn Tokyo's efforts to deny that Japan had coerced the women into military prostitution by trying to renew an apology statement from the early 1990s. The victims from countries like Korea, China, the Philippines and Indonesia will then give their testimonies and deliver a written request to the Japanese government to take legal responsibility and to compensate.
Get connected to Korea and the world. Join us every weekday for the latest developments out of Korea, Asia, and beyond. On air, on your mobile, and online, we lead the way every day. Arirang News.
To try and resolve the crisis in Ukraine, the European Union also offers $15 billion. President Park Geun-hye attended a prayer service on Sunday where she consoled the families of the victims of the Seoul ferry disaster and prayed for the return of the 16 people still missing. Thanking local churches for their volunteer work, fundraising efforts and prayers following the accident, the president then vowed to bolster the national safety system to prevent a similar disaster happening again. She also promised that recovery efforts will continue until every missing passenger is found. The churches hosting the service released a letter in which they pledged to help the country overcome its grief and build a safer and happier nation based on principles and righteousness. Now, in the domestic political scene, and Korea's rival parties have been having their say on last week's 2-day early voting period for this Wednesday's local elections. The two sides have been poring over which age groups headed to the polls, as the younger generation tend to lean more towards the Liberal Party and the older generation the more Conservative Party. Kwon So-ah has this report.
After a whopping 11.5% of Korea's eligible voters cast ballots during 2 days of early voting for the upcoming local elections, attention now is focused on which age groups had the best turnout. Voter turnout was the highest at nearly 16% among the youngest voting group, who usually tend to be progressive. They were followed by those in their 60s at 12%, who tend to lean conservative. Turnout was lower among voters in their 30s and 40s. The turnout was similar for voters in their 20s and 30s combined and for those in their 50s and above. Neither the ruling nor main opposition party seemed to be satisfied with the figures.
It's hard to tell which party will benefit the most from the early voting turnout. A narrow-minded analysis by politicians could lead voters to misjudge the situation.
However, the ruling Saenuri party did express its concerns about the high voter turnout among young people, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy said the number isn't actually that high, considering that the majority of the country's 35,000 soldiers are part of the 16% of people who voted in advance.
Overall, the voter turnout among those in their 30s and 40s is low. We're keeping an eye on that, as a percentage is 2.5% to 3% lower than that of those in their 50s and 60s.
Experts say the party's official statements on the early voting turnout seem like a typical strategy to boost support in the days before an election. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, financial authorities are keeping a close eye on the 3 credit card companies that recently resumed operations after a 3-month business suspension, following the largest ever personal data leak in Korea's history. They are going to offer greater incentives for the reporting of legal practices to entice customers and order firms to send text messages to their customers when a transaction is made on their card. Our Kim Min-ji has this report.
This footage from 2011 shows a credit card issuer urging passers-by to sign up for a new credit card, saying they'll receive free baseball tickets if they do. This is illegal as the value of the freebie exceeds the annual membership fee of roughly $10. To prevent such practices, financial authorities implemented an incentive reporting system back in 2012. The system, however, proved to be ineffective as it was complicated and the incentives were low. But now the Financial Supervisory Service has raised the incentive to 5 times the original amount. They say people who report on illegal methods to entice customers, such as issuing credit cards on the street or offering excessive giveaways, will be able to receive roughly $490 in incentives, up from $98. The stricter measures are part of efforts to prevent credit card companies who recently resumed business operations from engaging in aggressive promotional activities. 3 of the nation's leading credit card firms, KB Kookmin Card, Lotte Card, and NH Nongyap Card, have resumed operations after a 3-month business suspension for their involvement in the biggest personal data leak in Korean history. Financial authorities will also make card companies offer free text message alerts to their customers when they make purchases of over $50 on their cards. Card companies say the messaging service will cost them millions of dollars, but with their profits on the rise from last year, it seems they will begin offering the service in the coming weeks. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, in some science news, researchers here in Korea have developed a new type of antibiotic film that kills bacteria and germs in a matter of minutes, and this saves both time and money. Now, Son Jung-in shows us how it works.
This is an antibiotic nanofilm newly developed by local researchers. When they dribble a few drops that contain germs onto it, most of the bacteria die within 5 minutes. Looking through the microscope, the germs are destroyed. The sharp, rough surface of the nanofilm acts like the edge of a knife, ripping apart the cell wall of bacteria on contact.
These blades are literally nano-size, which means it causes no harm when a person touches it. But when it is brushed against bacteria, their cell walls are torn off, which eventually kills them.
It takes over an hour to kill germs via oxidation, but it takes just 15 minutes using this new wall-destroying material. It uses a cheaper version of nanographene and titanium oxide, which costs almost 1/10 the amount of commonly used silver nanoparticles. Experts believe they can expand their research to come up with other types of sterilizing products for sanitation in the city, including wastewater treatment.
Using this new type of technology, we anticipate to easily get rid of bacteria lurking at public facilities, such as on handles or seats in buses, subways, and bathrooms.
The results have been featured in the renowned academic journal, Advanced Functional Materials. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this morning. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, who's standing by at the news centre. Good morning to you, Eunice. Now, there's been a wave of criticism expressed over the U.S. government's prisoner swap deal with the Taliban.
That's right, Mark. The negotiations freed the last remaining American prisoner of war in the 13-year conflict with Afghanistan, but many are asking whether it was the right thing to do. In an emotional press conference earlier this morning, the parents of Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl expressed their joy at the news that their son, who had been held captive for nearly 5 years, was coming home. The 28-year-old is due to join them in the U.S. after medical evaluations are complete at a military hospital in Germany. But the unprecedented swap deal has come under criticism by some U.S. lawmakers, not only for the concern that enemies will now have a stronger incentive to capture Americans, but also because the 5 Taliban militants freed in exchange were senior members of the government that the U.S. had toppled back in 2001. Arizona Senator John McCain characterized them as, quote, the hardest of the hardcore. Explaining the deal, U.S. authorities said the POW's health had taken a turn for the worst. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel denied charges that the country had negotiated with terrorists and expressed hope that the exchange would lead to more breakthroughs with the Taliban. In Belgium, authorities have arrested a 29-year-old Frenchman for the deadly Jewish museum shooting that killed 3 and left 1 person severely injured late last month. He is identified as Mehdi Nemouche and was arrested at a train station in southern France on Friday in possession of firearms and ammunition. Prosecutors say he was also holding a video in which he apparently claimed responsibility for the May 24th shooting that had triggered alarm at various Jewish sites across Belgium. Prosecutors said Nemouche had a criminal record and had spent over a year in Syria, where he forged relations with radical Islamists. And in Bangkok, some 5,700 security forces were deployed following protests by the country's pro-government red shirts denouncing the military coup. The demonstrations were organized by a veteran social activist who supports ousted Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra, but they broke up a couple hours later after the thousands of soldiers and police secured key intersections. The military junta has banned political gatherings of 5 people or more, but small protests have taken place in the capital city for most days since the coup's launch on May 22nd. And finally, 2 Italian priests and a Canadian nun have arrived in Cameroon's capital city on Sunday after being freed from their captors who had held them for nearly 2 months. They were abducted by gunmen in the parish of Marua near Cameroon's border with Nigeria in early April. Though no group has claimed responsibility, the Nigerian militant group Boko Haram is suspected. No details of the circumstances of their release were given. The clerics had been working on improving water supplies and fighting the spread of HIV in Cameroon.
And a good Monday morning to you all as we kick things off with the Minsk Rhythmic Gymnastics World Cup, which took place over the weekend. And just like she did in the previous 8 consecutive World Cup events, Son Yeon-jae finished off on the podium once again. Now, not the best of her performance in Belarus, but the 20-year-old rhythmic gymnast was still able to finish off with a couple of medals as she won the silver medal in the hoop event after scoring 17.8833 points. Not only that, she was also able to win the bronze medal, this time over in the ribbon event, after scoring 17.7833 points. Now, despite struggling in the ball event and failing to advance to the finals for that event, Son Yeon-jae has now won a medal in 9 consecutive World Cup events. And now moving over to the majors, where LA Dodgers' Lee Hyun-jin earned his 6th win of the season, this time against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, he didn't get close to pitching a perfect game this time, but He still pitched 6 solid innings, giving up just 2 runs while striking out 4. But his 6th win of the season was a lot easier this time, thanks to his teammates that gave him enough run support, including Hanley Ramirez, who blasted 2 home runs on the day as the Dodgers topped the Pirates 12-2. And now moving over to the KBO this time, we had all 4 games take place on Sunday as the Lotte Giants crushed the Doosan Bears for the 2nd straight day 14-5, with the Nexen Heroes beating the LG Twins 8-4 and the Hanwha Eagles win one over the SK Wyverns 9-3. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the red-hot NC Dinos take on the Kia Tigers. Of course, going into the game here in the 2nd inning of the game, Lee Ho-jun to lead off the inning sends one to deep left center field. That one is out of here, and it's 1-0 NC Dinos. But check this out, bottom of the 2nd inning, Kim Da-won to lead off for Kia. Deja vu, a home run over the left center field wall, and we're tied 1-1. Not done yet, Lee Dae-hyung this time, an RBI single to right, and Kia has the lead 2-1. 3rd inning, more from Kia. Lee Bum-ho this time singles to center. Red Pill scores and it's 3-1 before Park In-nam makes it 4-1 with an RBI single to left field. Gonna go over to the 7th inning. Kia up 6-1. Lee Jong-wook singles to right. Deficit cut to 6-2, but it's Ji Seo-kun, the next batter, who drills this ball to deep center field. Gone a 3-run shot, and it's now 6-5. Despite the late rally, the Kia Tigers would hang on to beat the NC Dinos 6-5. And moving over to football this time, where the South Korean U23 team went up against Kuwait to commemorate the opening of the Incheon Asiad main stadium in a friendly. In a remarkable match from some of the top young footballers in the nation, as Kim Seung-dae opened up the scoring for Korea with a goal in the 20th minute. But after giving up a goal in the 39th minute, things went quiet from there as the match looked to be ending in a draw. But in the 90-plus minute, Korea draws a penalty as Chang Hyun-soo finds the back of the net, giving Korea the 2-1 victory. And now finishing things off, but staying in football, as Qatar's 2022 World Cup continues to get its share of controversies, as England's The Sunday Times reported that they have evidence of their bribery. According to the Sunday Times, they have emails, letters, and bank transactions which prove that Qatar has bribed their way into gaining the rights to host the 2022 World Cup. They added that the bribe money comes out to $5 million. Meanwhile, earlier last month, FIFA President Sepp Blatter acknowledged that it was a mistake giving Qatar the rights to the 2022 World Cup, but failed to mention what he plans to do. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. Well, after unseasonably hot weather we had last week, we'll finally get some relief from the heat today. Clouds will stick around throughout the day and rain is here. It's been raining down south from early morning hours, and rain clouds will soon dominate the whole peninsula, dropping 5 to 20 millimeters of precipitation here in Seoul, while down south will receive heavy downpours. So please gear up with your rainproof accessories before heading out today. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Morning low here in Seoul is starting out at 22, and the high will rise to 26, which is about 5 degrees lower than yesterday. And Daegu and Gwangju should see a high of 27 and 22, while Busan tops out at 24. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like down on Jeju and Daejeon should see a high of 24 and 25. Dokdo reaches 25 as well, and Mount Keungang tops out at 19. Well, that's all for me at this hour, but I'll be back with more updates afternoon.
Okay, well, that's all we have for you for now. We'll be back with another newscast at noon Korea time. Until then, goodbye.